Hello and welcome to Supercharged episode 209. I'm Adam Dotchis.
And I'm Tommy Houghton.
And today we are talking about 3D printing, which I have been waiting to do for a long time. We were going to get an expert because I didn't have a printer for a while because mine broke, or I was too dumb to use it. It's one of those. The support team at FlashForge, who I do not recommend, they couldn't help for a year. We tried to fix this for a year, went on support forums. I asked all sorts of people. No one could figure out what was wrong with it. The prints wouldn't adhere to the bed, which hopefully, if you don't know what that means, you will by the end of this episode. So I sold the printer as broken or not necessarily functioning to a guy I met on Craigslist. And he said, I asked him before he left, and I wish I still had his contact information because I was supposed to, we were going to keep in touch, but I realized that I don't actually have any of his information anymore. Oh,
because it was Craigslist Anonymous?
Yeah, and I had his phone number, but I can't figure out where it is. And so I'm gonna try looking again because he recommended I get a Prusa i3 Mark III, and at the time it had just come out. And for those of you who are not familiar with 3D printers at all, which is kind of my hope because otherwise this might be a little boring. The Prusa i3 Mark III is basically the question of the year is this the best 3D printer? And to give you an idea of what it is, and I guess I should not bury the lead, but I bought it and constructed it myself. And I did, well, to be fair, I did it with a 13-year-old boy. That sounds weird saying it that way. Bit, yeah. Richard's nephew is 13 years old. He was visiting us for the weekend, and he wants to be an engineer.
It's a fun project to do.
Yes, I thought that would be a good project. The way I always try to put everything like, here's the generic. I had help from a young boy. That doesn't sound good. Okay. Anyway, Nico is his name. He helped me. We thought it was going to take 2.5 hours because that's what someone on the internet said. It did not. It took like 2 days. I made a time lapse. It will be in this episode while you're watching. So at some point when we're talking about builds, it'll be like that. I may reference things visually in this one because there is a lot of visual stuff. So if you are listening to this episode, this is definitely one. I won't say this for most of the episodes because it's usually just Tommy and I talking. So you have to want to watch that. But in this case, there will be a complete 2-day build. I should say, it's not 100% complete. There's a point at the end where the camera files got corrupt for some reason. I think I switched SD cards and it was bad. But if you wouldn't know that it's not the whole build. It looks like it is. It's missing like tightening some screws and like turning it on. But I have some video on my phone, so maybe I'll just shove that in there as well. Anyway, you can see the whole process really, really fast and really, really fast for 2 days. It's
a nice compression.
Yeah, it's 4 minutes long.
Yeah, that's
a 4-minute build. So it's cool. It's kind of cool to watch because it looks like we're juggling screwdrivers and stuff. And the printer is just like flying around and eating gummy bears because that's literally part of the process with the Prusa. This printer has a lot of personality, as Tommy and I just found out, because when Tommy got here, and we're going to be doing as short of a show as possible today because we spent time downstairs trying to get the printer to work. It's not fully calibrated yet because it seems to think something's obstructing the nozzle right now, and we don't have time to figure out why. But
we got far though. The part of it we fixed.
Yeah, the y-axis belt was too loose, and I was pretty sure it wasn't too loose, so I didn't try to fix that. But Tommy was like, I don't know, it's kind of loose. So I believed him and tightened it up some more. I didn't think I could get it more, but it was because it was catching on one of the grub screws, and got it in. I'm sorry if you don't know any of the words that I'm saying. I didn't know them a week before this. The grub screw is like, I don't even know how to describe it other than what it looks like in this particular case, but it's you tighten it by putting an Allen key inside of a hole. It looks like a spool of thread with notches on it. And in that case, the conveyor belt notches catch on it, but I don't think it has to have notches. I think it just has to have a tightening thing on the circular rotational part. So anyway, that the belt was like escaping the grub screw and flying off, and Tommy said it feels a little loose because I insisted it wasn't, and so we tightened it, and Tommy was right, and it was working, so that was very good, and thank you, Tommy.
It helped.
What?
I said I'm happy to have helped.
It was a big help, and I mean,
I was glad because I wanted to see it kind of go through its little process.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to see it piss out some filament at least. So we haven't gotten to actually print anything yet, but it's hard. Building a printer is hard, much harder than I thought. And
there's a lot of parts and a lot of wires.
Denise built the first printer, and just to put this in perspective though, when we had that printer, it was basically like it was built already. It was the extruder was built already. It was kind of just like attaching some parts together. It took like a half an hour for her. She likes doing hardware stuff. I don't. So I was like, okay, well, you can do this because I don't really want to. And then we're both happy. So she did it, and I never really learned how it worked. And so I thought, if I'm going to get the printer this time, I can save $250, which is useful to me at this point, and not pay for them to build it. Plus, it would have taken like an extra 5-6 weeks to wait for them to build it.
But I guess probably a lot of people are picking.
I don't know what it is, because for a while it was faster to have them build it, and I was thinking of doing it, but then it was still going to take like 2 to 3 weeks. But then I went on their site and it was like, oh, you could have this in 3 days, and Nico was coming, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'll have it in time for Nico. Although we were going to try to build it for the show, Tommy and I, but we couldn't find a good time for it, and Nico seemed like that seemed like a better thing anyway, and Tommy helped me fix the problem, so everybody got to be part of the process. But anyway, it's very difficult. It's also hard to pick a printer, and I only got this one because the guy on Craigslist recommended it. He was like, all the problems that you've had, like having trouble getting prints off the print bed. The Prusa is like, looks a lot like a $200 printer that I saw on YouTube the other day, which might have made me feel bad if I hadn't built it yet, and know like all the extra stuff. But it's hard to pick a 3D printer because you see people like going crazy over a $200 printer and over like one that's thousands of dollars. And I mean, you can find someone who loves pretty much any printer in any price range, and then you have to, like, what can it print? What types of filament can it work with? Do you want ABS? Do you want PLA? And there are a lot of people and there are many other types than that. You can have a resin printer, which doesn't even use filament, and they're amazing, but they're also like chemically dangerous. I mean, they're toxic fumes. You have to clean it all the time.
Having worked with resin, it's that smells pretty bad.
Yeah, it's like it goes in the garage. It does not go in the house. If it goes in the house, you will not want to be in the house for a while. This is what I've been told.
The resin and the chemicals to clean it, the acetone, both smell horrible.
Yeah, and I've had acetone in the house, and when it was in the house, sometimes when you smooth ABS prints, you can smooth them by soaking a rag in acetone or a paper towel in acetone, lining it in a paint can, and then putting the print in the paint can and closing it in, and leave it in there for like 45 minutes. So it's really easy to do. It's not fast, but it's remarkably effective. And the problem is there should be a spray or something at this point. And now there might be soon, there's something called 3D gloop that you can brush on PLA and ABS. You have to get separate types, but you can brush that on, but they're working on a spray. So that was a lot of information up front there, but basically what I want to talk about today, because there's so much to talk about 3D printing wise, is how do you pick a printer to buy? And I'm by no means an expert on that, but I feel like I've been around the block enough that I can at least kind of talk about it from the perspective of someone who might be interested in getting into 3D printing for the first time and wanting to check this out.
Now, as someone who does not own one or is interested in poking into it, what can you do with a 3D printer? Obviously, you can use filaments and plastics to basically make objects, but what can you? What would you say? Like, what are the practical benefits?
So, if you go on YouTube, you won't find this out, probably because you see pretty much everybody 3D printing they're 3D printing like like low poly flower pots.
Yeah, or the guns.
Or figures.
There's a lot of controversy over like 3D printing guns now.
Yeah, that can be done. My printer is... I don't remember why this conversation came up, but Richard, I saw something about my printer being a gun-capable printer. I can handle, I think, the type of... I thought you could do it with PLA, but maybe it needs ABS. Most printers can print a gun. But Richard was like, oh, you can print a gun with that, I'm like, oh, good. That's going to happen. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. You'll see a lot of people on YouTube, like they're really into printing figurines instead of buying them, like the sort of people who print lots of dragons and soldiers and like to paint them. I'm not judging. I'm saying that like that's a very common hobbyist thing. And for $200, I don't remember what it's called, but it starts with an E. It's like E something, or Ender 3 maybe it's called, the $200 printer, which is a lot like the one I have without any of the bells and whistles. And so generally at this point, what you're paying for with 3D printers are bells and whistles, but we'll get to that in a second. The reason you would use a 3D printer practically, if you're not making figures and you're not making low poly flower pots, I got a great example, but I'm going to save that one. Is if there are things you can do like 3D print car parts. You can, if you're watching the video, which this, again, remind you, this is one to watch. The keyboard that I put on screen just disappeared for a second, but actually you can see it in Tommy's frame there. The keyboard is joined together by this plate called the bullet train, which is very expensive. I had to get a used one, and they don't really make it anymore because they used to charge like $120 for a thing to put your Apple keyboard and trackpad in, and at the time that was more money than the keyboard and trackpad cost. And then they made a new one for the new Magic trackpad and keyboard that was kickstarted, and apparently no one ever got, and I don't know what happened with this company or why they had such a hard time getting out the door or whatever. But if you want to join your keyboard together, you can download an attachment on Thingiverse. It's THINGIVERSE.com, where it's just a bunch of SLA files, which is what you use to eventually turn into a 3D print file. And there's software called a slicer that converts 3D objects that you could render in any 3D software pretty much into something that can be printed. It slices it up into different layers. And we're not going to get into that very much today because that's really complicated, and we'll do an episode in the future on how to make your prints not suck. I'm still learning a bit about that, but I've got a lot more of an idea than I used to. And anyway, the slicer converts those objects and can print them out. So you could print, you can download and print an attachment for that. You can make Christmas ornaments for a Christmas tree. You can print car parts technically. I've made a wooden picture frame with its wood plastic filament.
How'd it look?
It looked okay. It was a little warped because I couldn't get the heat right, but I'm gonna try it again on this printer because the pieces I made are fine. It would just bend, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time.
Yeah.
But when I was doing the art show, the future. I don't know how, if anyone listening remembers or watching remembers what I'm talking about, but that's actually how Tommy and I came to meet.
Yes.
But I was trying to create a picture frame and where I could slide in square photos, and then then I didn't have to buy a bunch of picture frames for it because surprisingly enough, these square picture frames are almost as expensive as like 16 by 20 or 18 by 24 frames. And I thought it would look cooler and be cooler if I made it, and so I tried to make one where you could just slide it in, and I did, but it would kind of like. You have to put supports in it because the plastic doesn't cool fast enough unless you print really slowly, and if it's too long, it'll dip anyway. So then I couldn't get the picture in because it kind of just fused the whole together. So I had to put supports on. So I was able to get one where you could just slide it in, and that worked out of ABS filament, which is a tougher plastic than PLA, but in some cases harder to work with. And then I made another one out of the wood filament, which I think is part PLA, and that one was like a snap together. I had little dowel type things that stuck out of one part of it, and you just pushed it together really hard and it would stick. So I made those, and they didn't work perfectly because they were a little warped. But like that's something that you could do, and I designed that from scratch. I didn't use any.
And how do you design, like using a CAD program or?
Yeah. So designing you can download stuff, as I mentioned, on Thingiverse. Yeah. You can also use. There's some controversy over what to use these days, and I've been out of the game for like a year or so now.
It's changed that much since?
It's changed quite a bit. And I mean, ever since this printer I got came out, it's since like January of this year, 2018, in case anyone's listening to this later in the future. This printer changed a lot of how things work because they make their own slicer software. Prusa does, or I should say there's a slicer software called Slicer, but it's spelled with a 3 for the E. I think I'm assuming the E.
Very 90s of them.
Yeah, and And a lot of like the new technology has a very 90s vibe to it, I think, because you see that with like the HoloLens and other emerging technologies that are where people are like cool, I can help shape the way this becomes something, and before this is mainstream. And a lot of these things are mainstream-ish already because it's so cheap, comparatively anyway. I mean, like, I think $200 for a 3D printer, that's affordable for most people. If you want it, like instead of buying a Nintendo Switch, you can buy a 3D printer and a bunch of filament, and make your own stuff. So it's like they're both great. I have them both, and I like 3D printing, and I like the Nintendo Switch. But my point is, if you like one empowers you to make stuff, and another is an entertainment device. So you got to have both in your life. You got to have entertainment and learning, but learning, I would put it a notch above entertainment, generally speaking, especially when it can be both. That's the holy grail. Anyway, so you can print picture frames. You can print car parts if you have tough enough material to do that, or if it's a plastic car part, then obviously ABS will be fine. PLA is generally like not production ready filament,
so don't do anything like industrial that you need to be that secure.
Yeah, I mean, PLA is fine for like hobby stuff, and it's fine for a lot of things. And all the cool filaments are PLA for the most part. Like, you'll have a harder time finding ABS filament that's good and can do wood or glitter or glow in the dark. I have all of those, and I have not been able to try them, and they've been sitting under the stairs for over a year, and I'm very excited about actually being able to use the glow in the dark one for the first time. But it's you can do all of these things. I mean, if you can think of anything that is a three-dimensional object that can fit in the dimensions of the printer, it's possible to make it. This is how things are prototyped. You could make an iPhone case or any smartphone case.
I think it's people realizing that you're basically designing something from scratch. There's a lot of implications about what you can make. Yeah,
the question of like, what can it do for you practically is hard to answer, because it's an answer that encompasses everything and nothing. There's very little it can't do, but it's the process of being able to do that is where the challenge comes in. So if you don't feel comfortable going into like Fusion 360, I think is the software that everyone really liked for a while, but now it's very expensive to use, like the free version. Well, no. Fusion 360 is Autodesk. That's the one that's free and not expensive. And I think that's actually what I've used. Autodesk has a lot of 3D printing tools that are pretty good. But there's another one that YouTubers liked a lot, but can't use anymore because they're not allowed to use the free version. Everything is posted publicly, which is not a problem for them. I was just watching about this morning, but there's so I'm trying to remember. But they because they use it for a business technically, that there's because they provide them on their YouTube channel to download, they're making money off of it, so then they have to pay, but it's like $200 a month if you pay. So there's not a reasonable amount of money for someone to go from using the free version to the expensive version on it. So a lot of people have been complaining about that, it sounds like. I'm new to hearing about that, so I don't know how many is a lot at the moment. But there's that software, which I cannot remember the name of at the moment, and I'm going to try to figure out while I'm talking, is the way to go. But there are a lot of different options, and Autodesk has more than one. And you can use SketchUp apparently to render models. Google has a VR model creator that you can get on Steam called Blocks, where you can make a model in 3D, and it's technically not for 3D printing, but it will, I believe it gives you a .obj object file.
Oh, yeah, that.
And that can be converted by a slicer into a 3D printable object. So you could design something in VR. I mean, pretty much anything you can design a 3D model in can be converted. So you can find free software all over the place. If you just search for 3D printing online design software, you go to Thingiverse, there are options linked on there, because I think Thingiverse is owned by Autodesk. You can go to Autodesk, you'll find like 5 different options, something you can download if you prefer. There's software that comes with 3D printers that often have design tools. There are design tools on your phone there are phone apps exclusively that can scan objects in a room.
Yeah, I've seen the scanners that do a good job of capturing.
So there's a lot of really impressive stuff, and so it's really like, if you can think of a good project, you can think of something practical to do with 3D printing. One of the reasons I jumped on this when I did, and not like, I mean, a while back I was like, I don't want to spend the money. I also don't like spending the money when I have to wait like 3 weeks for something to happen, because for some reason I will wait 6 months to ship it as long as it comes soon.
Yeah.
But if I have to, if it's in transit for too long, that's, I don't know, I'm weird like that. I've always been that way. So I will literally sit and wait until it shows up. Like, I'll have a store order it and then let me know it comes in. So then I can go pick it up the day of. Like, I want to have that feeling of I want it and now I can have it, not the I'm waiting for it and then I get excited and disappointed and then forget about it and then it shows up and then I don't care anymore. That's usually how it goes. And then I'm not motivated to do anything with it. And I figured with the 3D printer, if it comes and I'm not motivated to build it, then it's going to sit in a box. So I waited until it would come in 3 days. It took 6, but it was coming from Europe, so that was still impressive. And it got built and it's almost working. But yeah, so there's a lot of software online that you can use to design stuff if you want, and there's no, like, I mean, it's available for everything. Slicing software I thought would be very hard to get on the Mac, but it's like everything's cross-platform. It's quite impressive what you can do on pretty much any device in terms of building objects, but you don't have to. But I guess the thing I forgot to say was, I built this because I wanted to try to create a prototype of a bite splint for my mouth, because I have bruxism, and it's a long story and I'm not going to get into it, why I'm doing it this way, but I think that I can design something that will help me specifically that doesn't necessarily exist, or if it does, I'm not aware of it, and this way I can take it to a doctor and say, like, can this be done? Or if they can't, I can, if I can get a proper mold, I can build it myself, and I can make it myself with resin by creating a mold with a 3D printer. So if you have a problem to solve in 3 dimensions, by creating something, you can do it. And the thing that I found was most useful about having the 3D printer, I got it to make sculptures for the art show, and small ones, but nevertheless, and it was absolutely worth it. I didn't have to pay for that 3D printer, so that was that was part of the sponsorship with Pornhub, but. So it doesn't matter either way, but I mean, like, it was worth it was worth making 5 things with it for the $900. They came out so well, and it was such a cool process. It would have been worth paying that money for it, especially because if I had paid someone else to do it, it would have cost about, I think the minimum cost would have been $5,000 for the batch.
Yeah.
If it would have been that low, but I think it was quite a bit more. I think it was like $2,600 per candy bar sculpture. And they would have been a little bit bigger, but even if they were smaller, it wouldn't matter.
That's
like,
absurd. They
could have been bigger, but there's a minimum cost per thing, and yeah. So this was just a quote from a place called Pretty in Plastic. I think they're called. I think that's Tommy. You must have heard of them.
I have not.
Really?
That's a great name, though.
Oh yeah, they're awesome, and the work that they do is incredible. And they fabricate a lot of stuff for artists, and they do a lot of 3D printing and a lot of direct sculpting. But like, if you're a sculpture artist and don't have time to do your own work anymore, which is apparently a very common thing, and I'm not going to judge, because I can totally see how that would happen. And it's like, you have this great idea for something you want to make, you have the skill to make it, but you don't have the time to do everything, because you got to like market yourself and go talk. Like, once you're popular, it's understandable that you're going to have some help. So they fabricate a bunch of stuff based on very specific design conventions, and they do a lot of like props and things for Hollywood. They basically can create anything in 3 dimensions, but they're very expensive because they're so good. So I'm not knocking them. It's just I was too poor, and it would have been bad use of the budget. We had a lot of money, I thought, but not that much. So we did it ourselves. It was a great learning experience, and it's not enough though, because the printer broke and I could fix it. But it's one of those things where it's like, if you think like, oh, I could buy this. Well, when you have a 3D printer, you should, when you're looking at something to buy, you can always like say, could I print this? And a lot of the time the answer is yes. Because when I was thinking of getting something to combine the keyboards, that's why I brought that one up. I searched on Thingiverse. Someone had designed something to combine the keyboard and the trackpad already for both left and right-handed people, which is very kind.
That is very kind.
Yes, because that's my main problem. It's why the Bullet Train was the only one that I could get, because all the other ones were for right-handed people, or I also wanted the palm rest. That was part of it. I used to use it for home theater stuff, and now it's just up here because I don't need that anymore. Thank you, NVIDIA Shield. Anyway, that's. I think I probably beat that horse to death, but the main thing is, it's like, if you can buy it, you can probably 3D print it, and that's where the practicality comes in. So it will eventually pay for itself if you use it.
I think it's the idea of people getting their heads around making their own things. Because it's a whole other level of, people said 3D printing is going to revolutionize stuff, and we're still at an early phase, but it's grown so much that you can still make impressive stuff. And as it becomes more refined and the materials change, allowing you to have different variety of materials to print with, like it's, like you said, you've got the wood replacement or the wood style. You've got so many different types of materials to print with. You can make objects of different kinds, and as they get more refined and able to print smaller detail, you can make some pretty crazy stuff. That's like you said, if you can buy it, you can make it. Yeah,
and I would caution, though, before anyone like just jumps in, if for some reason I've excited you enough to do that, which would be great. I mean, like, you should. I highly encourage doing this. As much of a pain in the ass as it can be, sometimes it's great and it's worth it. Especially when like I would not necessarily recommend getting the printer I got. I mean, I would, because I think it is. I don't know for sure yet, because we haven't printed anything on it yet, but. I'm fairly confident, having seen what it can produce, that it is fantastic for the price. And it's $750 for the kit, and it's $1,000 for if they build it for you, which I would recommend doing if you don't want to spend an entire, and I literally do mean an entire weekend, because not because it will take you that long, but because there's so much information. And people on YouTube had the same experience, and I found this out after. There's one guy, Thomas Salander, I was watching his live stream of building it when I was a little stumped on one part and not sure what the instructions meant. And I finished the rest of it without finishing the live stream, and then I realized his live stream actually ended halfway, and there was another 4 hours of another live stream of him finishing the build. And I had thought the whole time, I was like, oh yeah, he made it in 3 hours. Good for him. But it's... But he was too tired and had to stop. So it's one of those things. And he said in the second stream, when I actually watched it after I'd finished building the printer, just out of curiosity, it was he was like, I had to stop last night. I didn't really explain this, but the instructions are they're very good. They're good, but there's so much happening. There's so much to think about that it just fries your brain, and you stop being able to pay attention to the details. It just all starts to blur together, and that is exactly what I felt. So if you try to do it, you need to, I would say, do 2 hours and break after each step, especially after building the extruder, because that's the hardest. Because it will just make your mind go nuts. You will go completely crazy, in terms of how you think. You just can't think straight. So it's very, very complicated to build from scratch. But if you can buy printers where you're just assembling a few parts, that takes 30 to 45 minutes. You can get printers that are pre-assembled, and a lot of the times those aren't even that expensive. So the cost, pre-assembled doesn't mean it's more expensive. A lot of the times it will, but if you find a printer that's over $1,000, it's pre-assembled, and it says for beginners, it's probably not a good printer. So you can read about them online. The Prusa is generally considered to be the best, but it's in the sub $1,000 price range. But what is it called? There's one. I think it's by what is Monoprice? That's it. Monoprice makes a pretty good cheap one.
How long until Amazon Basics makes one?
I was wondering that, actually, because
they're always
boy, do they have everything.
The Monoprice model. Monoprice is a store that basically makes
really
consumer electronics,
usually really good,
that are made as cheaply as possible to save price.
Yeah, they have a great surround sound system. They actually got sued over it because it copied something too closely.
Yeah, their goal is to take something that's popular, like a 4K monitor or something, maybe Apple or whatever, and try to reduce the cost using as similar components as possible. And the monoprice is usually pretty good.
Yeah.
But Amazon decided to copy them and is making Amazon Basics electronics now more and more.
Yeah, and Amazon Basics stuff is also quite good for the price most of the time. So they, for monoprice maybe, but either way, I feel like Amazon will leave that to monoprice, perhaps, because I don't think Amazon can provide their customer service at the level that they like to for a 3D printing product, or at least I should say a 3D printer, because it is one of the highest levels of difficulty of any DIY project or early adoption technology you could get. Like, I compare this to making things for the HoloLens, writing code from scratch. It's building this printer is not as complicated as maybe writing a computer program. It is for me because I know how to do the computer programming already, and so that makes sense to me, whereas building hardware I'm not as good at and have less experience with, so that is harder. But it's still very complicated when you encompass all of the, like, what are the different, what can go wrong? How do I troubleshoot? Where do I get things to print? How do I design things to print when I want full control over it? There's temperatures, layer heights, infill, all these little details and stuff we'll go over in detail in another episode. But it's a lot of stuff. So if you're thinking about getting into 3D printing, make sure you have time for it. Otherwise, you're not gonna like doing it.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to really get into it right now. You can't. When I started, I had I'm in the situation I'm in where I had to get another printer, which may end up being a good thing in the long run because I ended up with a good printer with a good support team and a huge community surrounding it and all the stuff that I need to succeed and learn. However, you should want to do that. That should interest you. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of like a passive hobbyist, and when the printer breaks or there's something that goes wrong with it, and it's not necessarily broken, but it's just not doing what you want it to do, then you're not going to know what to do. It's going to be hard to find help. Like, you got to be willing to put the time in, basically. Like, if you can't devote a day a week to 3D printing, and I don't mean like the whole day, but like if you can't devote Saturday afternoon every week or most Saturday afternoons to 3D printing, it's probably not the hobby for you. And that's not forever, but it's, like for a while until you get the hang of things and understand how they work and you've had a few problems and had to fix them. But that said, finding a 3D printer, it's usually, I would say that the best thing that you can do is get the cheapest one possible to start with, because then if it breaks, at least, and you have problems with it, then you learn what you need help with, so you can learn to pick a better one for you.
What's a reasonable price for a beginning printer, would you say?
$200 to $300.
Before you get to the cheapest stuff, like...
it's
because I know there's they make the pens and things that you can print stuff.
Oh
with.
Yeah, if you wanted to really experiment, you can get a pen, and they're okay, where you just draw in 3D space and it's the same thing. It's just an extruder heated and it's shitting filament out of itself. So, and that's all a 3D printer does. But the 3D printer is like, you tell it, it follows instructions and does it for you with machine precision.
Yeah, and with really precise movements versus your janky ass inability to hold still.
Yeah, but this is the thing with cheap 3D printers. When you buy other ones, you're paying for conveniences, bells and whistles, and all those sorts of things. The Prusa i3 Mark III, which is what I have, you can get an earlier version of it for a lot less money that will ship right away, and is still a very good printer. And you can even upgrade it to become a Mark III later if you want. But that printer doesn't have all the same things. Like the problems I had is sometimes the filament wouldn't load properly. This one, the Prusa i3 Mark III, has a filament sensor. It also has a removable heat bed surface thing where it's magnetic. You pop it off and then you can bend it to pop the print off of the surface. Whereas with other ones, you have to scrape them off with different metal tools. I have 8 tools for scraping because some prints like different tools. But there are things like what is that one where when you're putting filling in a hole in the wall with spackle, or what is that stuff called?
Drywall.
Is it called drywall?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to replace. If you're
I don't
replacing a
know.
whole, like, if it's too big, you will add some drywall up, and then you put plaster up.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean if it's like filling in a hole with a nail and painting over it, that's a spackle.
That's part of it.
Yeah, and then use that scraping thing.
Yeah.
What's that called?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to figure out is what those things are called. I mean, they look like spatulas, but they're metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you search 3D printing removal or part removal or bed removal, even though it's removing from the bed, not removing the bed, you'll see that. You'll see tons of them. And they're not that expensive, but you really have to like jam them in there. It can feel like you're going to damage the bed. Also, the bed needs to be sprayed a lot for adhesion. Then it's one of the biggest problems is getting prints to adhere to the bed and cool fast enough. The heat, configuring heat is really hard. The Prusa i3 Mark III makes it easy to do that.
It is a hardwood joint knife.
Oh, that is not what I was going to guess. So,
sorry, hardwood is the handle. Yeah, it's a joint knife.
Okay, so there you go, joint knife. And they have ones
you can
too.
Just say
though,
scraper too.
Yeah. And the ones that Tommy's looking at right now, you can't see his phone, but it's they're flat.
Yeah.
Completely. They have ones that are right angled too, at different angles that can make it easier. There are ones that look like a frosting knife for frosting a cake, and those ones can be really good if you need to slide under really thin. It's the same thing you use to break into a car if you ever locked your keys in your car.
Yeah.
Same sort of tool, but usually they're like angled a little bit for the 3D printers instead of being just like a knife shape. So there are all these like little things that make it more complicated to get the prints off, and all of that. And so when you buy a printer like I did, like with the Prusa i3 Mark III has a lot of features that make it easier to load the filament, solve problems, know what's going on. It checks everything to a point that it's honestly right now a little annoying because I just want to print something and
it's like we got to check everything.
Yeah, it won't do anything until it has checked all possible problems and made sure they're working. So I appreciate that on some level, but I'm getting a little impatient with it because it doesn't give you a lot of information when it fails, but there's also plenty of information online that you can look up, and it's a small LCD screen, so like it makes sense that they're not putting it all on there. But you don't get this printer unless you are like I would not get a Prusa i3 Mark III unless you're pretty serious about doing this, because it is made for serious hobbyists, and I don't think I'm quite at that level, but I decided I needed to be able to at least pretend like I am in order to do this well. So that is I mean that's that, but in terms of like printers that you should start with, I feel like the best thing to do is I was right, it's the Creality 3D Ender it's actually under $200 right now. It's $180. It looks like you can get it on Alibaba for $160, but I mean, I don't know if it probably will take a while to get there. So a lot of places have this thing. I think you can probably buy it on Amazon. It looks remarkably similar to the Prusa, but it doesn't have a lot of those features. However, quality prints are not indicative of the print price. It has a lot to do with the size of the nozzle, the settings, finding those magic numbers is what they call them. And figuring out like what's the optimal layer height. Like for the Ender, you can do an optimal layer height of 5 microns, and that's really small, and it will basically take the whole day to print probably on that thing. I don't know because I don't know what the times are, but on the Prusa it would take like 8 hours, so I'm assuming on the Ender it would take a bit longer. And it can't get as precise as a better printer, but in terms of like having a really smooth, high quality print, you can do that with a super cheap printer. You just have to figure out how to work with it. And that's the case with all of them. It's just easier. Generally speaking, when you pay more, it's easier to figure those things out. But you want to go with a popular printer. Just find out what people are looking for. But start with something cheap, figure out why you don't like it, and then when you're ready to upgrade, you won't have put in too much money, and then you'll know what features to look for that will kind of fill in the blanks of the things that you don't like to do or the problems that you tend to have that you want the printer to try to account for. Because until you're annoyed by a 3D printer sufficiently, you won't know which one is the right one to buy for you.
Well, even if you get a cheaper printer, as long as you find one that has a supportive community,
yeah,
you can troubleshoot a lot of problems through that.
Yeah. definitely get one that has support. Like FlashForge, the guy I sold mine to loves the Creator Pro that I had, and it was a very well respected printer, but there's no support for it pretty much. Like the support team, they don't care. They're I think in Japan, or they're not, at least not in America, but I don't think English is the first language based on the support emails I got, and they don't have to help you. They don't care. They have offices in the United States, but it doesn't really matter. And you have a 6-month warranty on the thing, and that's like right when it starts having problems. So they know. So I would definitely get one with at least a year warranty. I'd get one. You definitely want a good community. But for the most part, I would say get a piece of shit first, just so you know what it is that you don't do like about it, and you're not, putting so much money into it, because you will find, especially with this Creality 3D Ender 3 printer, because I can't avoid it. The internet's going crazy over this thing right now. And the monoprice one is very similar. It's a little bit more money, but Amazon Prime now usually has it for some reason, so that you can get these pretty easily and quickly. Those are both really cheap. You can get good prints out of them if you do your research, and it's a good way to learn without investing too much money. So that's where I would start. That's what I would have done had I known better in the beginning. But the printer, I ended up getting this printer and not choosing to go that route because I wanted something because I knew what bothers me, and I could account for that, and the Prusa was recommended to me by a person who knows their shit. So I decided to go that route, and hopefully I won't regret it. So far, I'm fond of it. It's adorable. And let's just hope the print quality is as good as everyone says it is. But
I'm excited to see when it starts working.
Yeah, we'll be digging into it more as the prints come out. We'll show some video. Maybe we'll actually take some of the podcast stuff downstairs for a day.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, and we'll actually do like a hands-on experiment with it once it's up and running, which will presumably be by next week. But I don't want to do a bunch of 3D printing shows in a row. But that said, we forgot to do our little question at the top of the show, even though we had one. But we got to wrap it up because we're definitely way over time today, trying to get this whole printer thing to function.
But it was worth it, worth the investment.
Yeah, I'm glad that it wasn't super boring for you.
No, it was fun.
So we'll dive into it more, but I do want to say we don't have any listener questions today. I was referring to like our silly Yahoo Answers question that we've been doing at the top of the shows, but we'll throw that in next week when we have more time. But if you have any questions about 3D printing or topics that you want us to cover on 3D printing, we have a lot of ability to learn and find out about that right now. So definitely send those in, supercharged@toasterdog.com. We can get the questions and just find that way. But if you just go to awkwardhuman.com/supercharged, there's a form there. That's much better because then it like sorts everything into the rundown for us, so we know what we're talking about. And then we can build shows around the 3D printing. And of course, if you have questions about anything else or any other ideas for shows you want us to do, topics you want us to talk about, problems you want us to solve, send those in as well. And we'll be happy to do that. But for now, we're just going to call it a day. And unless you have anything you want to add.
No, excited to see what we print.
Yeah, we'll be back at it probably in a few weeks, hopefully. Not too long, but I just want to give it a little space for those of you who don't want to get super nerdy with 3D printing, because I'll definitely be getting into like this is how you slice a file, and this is how it prints, and this is how long it takes, and this is what it looks like and sounds like, and all of those things, and how you can make your prints look better. And we'll talk about smoothing and finishing and those sorts of things in a future show or shows. But for now, hopefully, if you want to get started, that's some good information to help you pick out what you want, why you might want to do it. And if you do start doing it, definitely please do write us in, even if you don't have anything to ask, which I don't think will be the case. Like, if you don't know what you're doing, you will have something to ask, which I may or may not be able to help with. I don't know. But but if you do get into it, it would be great to know, like, what did you buy? How do you feel about it? Why, like, did you get a cheap one? Did you decide to go with something more expensive? We didn't even have a chance to talk about resin printers very much, but there's a $500 resin printer that if you have a garage and a high tolerance for fumes and cleaning up after your print job every single time, the resin printers are absolutely amazing. Just look up SLA printing, and you'll find out. So they're fast and they're smooth, and it, for some people, it's worth the BS that you have to go through. So check those out too if you want. They're also not too expensive, but yeah, you own a house if you do that. So that's about it. We will be back at you next week with a non-3D printing topic, and I hope you have a wonderful time doing whatever it is you do all week.
Yeah, have a wonderful week and day and month and year.
Yep, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Supercharged. If you'd like to send in a comment or a question, you can do so on awkward.email. You just go on your web browser to awkward.email. It's actually a website. And you can call or text 509-AWKWARD instead if you'd like to just skip all of that and do it from your phone. Also, if you'd like to check out some of our other shows, we've got a lot of great shows now, and we're having more every day, or, eventually. You can do that on awkwardhuman.com/podcast. Go check it out. We've got a lot of good stuff, and we hope that you'll be listening every week. Thanks.